Text everyone that we're on live. We are live. Let's see, case remind. So many texts today. Okay, we are live. Okay, everybody. Let us get the guitar and then we will chant as we're normally chanting right now for the people in Ukraine and also in Russia. We want to pray for them. Hold on a second. And so we chant the prayers to Lord Nrsingadev. See, focus, focus. Oh, make sure my camera focuses. There we go. Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Ati Hare, Ati Rama Hare Rama, Rama Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Rama Hare Hare, Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Pada, Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Haribo, 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 Jai Om Vishnupad, Paramahamsa, Paramahansa, also Teta, Satashi, Shima is Divine Grace, Abhaya Charanada, Bhaktivedanta Goswami, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. ISKCON Founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai. Namacharya Srila Huidas Thakur Ki Jai. Prem se kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shadwaita Kanada Shivasari Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. Shri Shri Radhakrishna Gopi Gopinath Sayam Kunda Radhakunda Giri Govardhan Ki Jai, Vrindavan Ki Jai, Majuram Ki Jai, Jagatha Swami Ki Jai, Manamai Ki Jai, Shrimati Tulasi Devi Ki Jai, Samaveda Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai, Gaur Premananda Hari Hari Bo. All glory is the assembled devotees, all glory is the assembled devotees, all glory is the assembled devotees. All glory is to Shri Guru and Gauranga, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai, Nama Om Vishnu Padaya, Krishna Prastaya Bhudale, Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Namani Namaste, Saraswati Devi, Gauravani, Prajarni, Nivashesha Shunyavadi, Paschacha, Teja, Tarani. So we're continuing with our study of the Sri Caitanya Caritamrta. We are now on the 25th chapter of the Madhya Lila, which incidentally is the last chapter in the Madhya Lila, and then we go to the Ancha Lila. So in the next few days we should be finishing up the Madhya Lila and go to the Ancha Lila, and this particular chapter deals with Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu saving the residents of Varanasi. So it's a very interesting chapter dealing with the philosophy of Krishna consciousness, dealing with Mayavad philosophy and how we defeat Mayavad philosophy, and all other subject matters that are connected with Bhakti Yoga. So let's go on and continue reading the Caitanya Caritamrta. So, Om Gana Timiranda Shah Gananjana Shlakaya Chakshur Meditam Yena Tasmai Shigarve Naha. I offer my respectful obeisances unto the lotus feet of my spiritual masters, Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada, who so kindly opened my eyes with the torchlight of knowledge while I was blinded in the darkness of ignorance. So, Jaya Jaya Shri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Jaya Jaya Shri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Jaya Jaya Shri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaur Bhakta Vrinda. Alrighty, we're on text 79 in the 24th chapter of 25th chapter of Madhya Lila Sri Caitanya Caritamrta. So let's continue. Jive Vishnu Buddhe Udure Ye Brahma Rudrasama Narayane Manetare Pashandite Ganana. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu continued, to say nothing of ordinary living entities, even Lord Brahma and Lord Shiva cannot be considered on the level of Vishnu or Narayan. If one considers them as such, he is immediately considered an offender and atheist. And here's the same verse we heard quoted many, many times before. And I'll tell you some interesting stories about this verse. Yastu Narayanam Devam Rama Rudradi Toiva Takhasamate Naiva Fiksheta Sapa Shandi Bhavatturvam. A person who considers demigods like Brahma and Shiva to be on an equal level with Narayan is to be considered an offender. A Pashandi. Pashandi means like atheist, offender, low class, all those different conceptions rolled into one. So as I said, I would tell you an interesting story. So this used to be one of my favorite verses, one which I would regularly pull out when I would preach at Hindu centers. Now, a Hindu center is a center where, what does it mean? There may be many different deities, or people may believe in impersonalism, but generally, there's many different deities. You go to the Hindu center, a pretty much big one, and you'll find at least 6, 7 altars, all separated, all with their own individual grill in front. Grill doesn't mean something you cook with. Grill means something that's like a metal garage door that rolls down and covers that particular altar or garage. So each and every one of the altars has their own metal gate that goes down, or grill, whatever you may call it. And when you're worshiping a particular deity, let's say you're of a particular community, then you say, can my gate be raised so we can do our puja? And so, imagine 7 or 8, and sometimes even more if you a really big center. And so there's Krishna with Radha, of course. There's Ganesh. There's Durga. There's Lord Shiva. There's Lord Shiva with Durga. There's actually so many different personalities. Of course, not Vayu. Of course, Hanuman may have his own altar. And who else? Lord Brahma doesn't have his own altar. Anyway, there's a whole bunch of different demigods and maybe saints, maybe Indira Gandhi in one of the altars. But anyway, whatever it is, there's a whole bunch of them. And so when I used to be invited, I'm using the word deliberately, used to be invited to the Hindu centers to preach. That was one of the first verses I took out of my hat, took out of my head, took out of my repertoire. Yastu Narayanam Devam. That one who actually considers the demigods like Brahma, Rudra, or cannot be equal to or independent of Lord Vishnu, then that person is an offender, a fallen, atheist, and all those other nice things. And so, the room used to become really quiet. This Swamiji is not so liberal. And so, after a while, my invitation started to diminish. In fact, even when I was invited, the person who invited me would generally say, Swamiji, could you please not preach against demigod worship? And I would say, yes, and I would do it anyway. So anyway, so we have to be careful. Actually, Krishna says in the Gita you shouldn't do stuff like that. That was when I was young. I mean, I took sannyas like when I was 28 years old. What do you expect from a 28-year-old person? And so now I actually follow Krishna's direction. One should not discourage those uh, who are not Krishna conscious and encourage them to work in the spirit of devotion. So I don't pull out the heavy guns when I'm preaching to people anymore. It's just like, of course, at the same time, I don't say that worship of the demigods is the same as worship of Krishna. I just make a positive statement rather than really just chastising everybody for worshiping the demigods. So I actually learned my lesson. But anyway, because people are very attached, and it's not that bad they're worshiping the demigods because they're at least accepting something higher than themselves. Like even you'll find certain societies like the American Indian Society where they worship the sun or the moon, and at least there's some recognition that there's some higher powers. Maybe they don't recognize there's one supreme, highest power, but at least there's a recognition of something higher than themselves. At least there's recognition of there's some intelligence behind the creation, not only behind the creation, within the creation, etc. So it's a step in the right direction. Maybe a small step, but it's a step in the right direction. So we have to be careful of using these particular verses or statements by Prabhupada to smash people. Our whole point is not, our whole goal is not to smash people, but to bring people to Krishna consciousness. So one has to become very, very expert. I mean, just like Srila Prabhupada when he's preaching to the hippies who are taking all sorts of druggies. I know druggies is a plural now. So when he was preaching to all the hippies, he would sometimes say, stay high forever. Instead of, I mean, many times in private he would really criticize the drug culture. But sometimes in public he would just say, stay high forever. In this way he would definitely dovetail their propensities and somehow or other try to bring people to Krishna consciousness. I remember when I first joined the Krishna consciousness movement, devotees were chanting and they were talking about getting high. That means like a drug high by chanting. So some devotees, they'd be chanting Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. Are you getting high yet? Hare Krishna, Hare. Not yet, Prabhu. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Ram, Hare Ram, Ram Ram. I'm high now. So, Prakashananda Kahe, Tumi Sakshat Bhagavan, Tabu Yadi Karatanra Dasa Abhimana. Prakashananda Saraswati Prakashananda replied, you are the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna himself. Nonetheless, you are considering yourself his eternal servant. Tabu puja tumi bhada amahite sarvanasha hayamora tomara nindate. My dear Lord, you are the Supreme Lord, and although you consider yourself the Lord's servant, you are nonetheless worshipable. You are much greater than I, therefore all my spiritual achievements have been lost because I have blasphemed you. So this is Prakashananda Saraswati. For those of you who don't remember, he was the one who was preaching Mayavad philosophy. He was the head of all the Mayavadism, Varanasi. And so, now he has become converted because Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu understood how to approach him. Muktanam api siddhanam narayana parayana sadurlava prashantatma katishvapi mahamune. O great sage, out of many millions of materially liberated people who are free from ignorance, and out of many millions of siddhas who have nearly attained perfection, there is hardly one pure devotee of Narayana. Only such a devotee is actually completely satisfied and peaceful. This verse is quoted from Srimad Bhagavatam 6.14.5. Ayu Shriyam Yasho Dharmam Lokan Ashishahi Vacha Hanti Shreyamsi Sarvani Pumso Mahadatikramaha. When a person mistreats great souls, his lifespan, opulence, reputation, religion, possessions, and all good fortune are destroyed. This statement, Srimad Bhagavatam 10.4.46, was made by Shukadeva Goswami to Maharaj Parikshit. It's a fact. If you offend a great devotee, your material fortune, as well as your spiritual fortune, is going to be wiped out. Naishamatis tabadorukramangrim sprishat yanartha bhagamo yadartha mahi sampada vrajobhishekam niskinchananam navanita yavat. Unless human society accepts the dust of the lotus feet of great Mahatmas, devotees who have nothing to do with material possessions, mankind cannot turn its attention to the lotus feet of Krishna. Those lotus feet vanquished all the unwanted, miserable conditions of material life. In other words, you can't become Krishna conscious until you approach the Mahatmas. Why? Because the Mahatmas possess Krishna. The Mahatmas possess Bhakti. Krishna say Tamar, Krishna Dite Par. So Krishna belongs to them. One of the qualities of a pure devotee is what? That he's able to control, he or she is able to control Krishna by his devotion or attract Krishna. Nectar devotion tells us that. And another point is the pure devotee has bhakti. Krishna doesn't give bhakti. Pure devotee gives bhakti. Bhakti is independent. This verse appears in Srimad Bhagavatam 7.5.32. For an explanation, see Madhya Lila 22.53. Evi tomara padhabje upajibe bhakti tati lagi kari tomara charane pranati. Henceforth I shall certainly develop devotional service unto your lotus feet. For this reason I have come to you and have fallen down at your lotus feet. Etabali parbore lana tataya vasila prabhure prakashananda uchite lagila. After saying this, Prakashananda Saraswati sat down with Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu and began to question the Lord as follows. Mayabade karila yata doshera kyana savye jani acharyera kalpita vyakyana. Prakashananda Saraswati said, we can understand the faults you have pointed out in the Mayavad philosophy. All the explanations given by Shankaracharya are imaginary. Sutrera karilatume mukyarta vivarana ta shuni savara hoila chamatkaramana. My dear Lord, whatever direct meaning you have given when explaining the Brahma Sutra is certainly very wonderful to all of us. Tumitag shvara tamara ache sarva shakti sanshepa rupe tha tumi shunite hayamati. You are the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and therefore you have inconceivable energies. I wish to hear from you briefly about the Brahma Sutra. Prakashananda Saraswati said that he had already understood Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu's explanation of the direct import of the Brahma Sutra. Nonetheless, he was requesting the Lord to now briefly give the purport of the Brahma Sutra, the Vedanta Sutra. Vedanta Sutra and Brahma Sutra are the same. It begins with the Tato Brahmadhyasya. Now is the time to look for the absolute truth. Now, the Vedanta Sutra is actually a summary or sort of a short statement based upon the Upanishads. The Upanishads are quite lengthy, and so the Brahma Sutra sort of like summarizes them in codes, very short statements, because one who reads the Brahma Sutra and is able to understand it is understood to have understood the philosophy. Otherwise, it's very difficult to understand. Prabhukahayami jiva ati tucha jnana vyasa sutrera gambira harta vyasa bhagavan. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu replied, I'm an ordinary living being, and therefore my knowledge is very insignificant. However, the meaning of the Brahma Sutra is very grave because its author, Vyasadeva, is the Supreme Personality of God himself. And Prabhupada explains, An ordinary living being cannot actually understand the meaning of the Vedanta Sutra. One can understand the meaning if he hears it from the authority of Vyasadeva himself. For this purpose, Vyasadeva gave a commentary on the Brahma Sutra in the form of what? Srimad Bhagavatam. He had been instructed to do this by his spiritual master Narada. Of course, Shankaracharya distorted the meaning of the Brahma Sutra because he had the motive to serve. He wanted to establish Vedic knowledge in place of the atheistic knowledge spread by Lord Buddha. All these necessities are there according to time and circumstances. Neither Lord Buddha nor Shankaracharya is to be blamed. The time required such an explanation for the understanding of various types of atheists. The conclusion is that one can understand the meaning of the Vedanta Sutra without going through Srimad Bhagavatam and rendering devotional service. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu therefore further explains the matter in the following verses. So, in other words, what happened? Let's go through a little history, which we've done before, but it bears hearing again. So, India, before the beginning of the first millennium, India had become, or the Vedic philosophy was being used, or the Vedas were being misused by the Brahmins in basically two different ways. One, the Brahmanas had established this caste system and were exploiting people financially. That's one thing. And so they had sort of a monopoly on Brahminical practices, which basically were bringing in the Lakshmi to the Brahmanas. Okay. And so therefore, people started to rebel against the Brahmanas. They didn't like it very much. And then also, as Srila Prabhupada commented, the Brahmanas were engaged in all these sacrifices to justify killing and ultimately eating meat. That's meat for those of you who can't spell. And so these sacrifices are prohibited in Kali Yuga, especially Gomeda, Ashvameda. And the Brahmanas would engage in these ritualistic sacrifices, which they weren't authorized to do. And the whole Brahminical culture was becoming contaminated because of that, and the idea that one had to be born in a Brahmin family. Even if one doesn't have the qualities, one was considered a Brahmin. And so people rebelled. And it was necessary to take people away from the Vedas in order to, let's say, disempower these ritualistic Brahmanas. So Lord Buddha appeared for that particular purpose. He took people away from the Vedas, and they were somewhat relieved. Wow, now we got ahimsa paramo dharma. That means nonviolence is the topmost dharma. And we don't have to be exploited by these people anymore. And now there's equality between all the different castes and creeds and everything like that. And everybody gonna love one another. So there's a lot of attractive features. I mean, Lord Buddha himself never taught atheism. He didn't even comment on the existence of God. He simply taught a type of psychology. What is the psychology he taught? That the material world is suffering. Suffering is caused by attachment. You give up the attachment, the suffering goes away, and then he taught the Eightfold Path, which is the fourth noble truth. Right living, right thinking, mode of goodness type of stuff. So it's like a psychological approach. His followers and subsequent followers actually developed other philosophies such as atheistic philosophy, voidistic philosophy, and everything like that. But in any case, the main point is Lord Buddha took everybody away from the Vedic literatures and really created an era of peace in India, which is interesting because previously, even the Emperor Ashoka, who was the famous Buddhist, the person who spread Buddhism all over India, he was quite a violent chap before he became a Buddhist. He was going to Orissa and killing so many people, not in the name of religion, but in the name of conquering and economic conquest, etc., like that. So, therefore, Buddha really kept things peaceful, or Buddhism really kept things peaceful in India. However, people were misunderstanding the absolute truth, and they thought it was simply either psychology or voidist or whatever. And so it was necessary to bring them back to the Vedas. But you couldn't really bring them back to the Vedas with a personal understanding because it would have been too much for these people. They were attached to their philosophy. Yes, everything's one or everything's nothing. So, all right. So let's sort of use the Vedas to propagate that particular philosophy. Even though the Vedas don't talk about it, but let's take the indirect meaning of the Vedas, and that was Shankaracharya's mission. And Shankaracharya, he is an incarnation of Lord Shiva, and he had that mission to bewilder people with atheism so they could come back to the Vedic literatures. Okay, so then everybody goes back to the Vedic literatures. Buddhists pretty much were driven out of India, other than in a few places like Gaya, and of course they went to Nepal and other places, other countries. But India, very few Buddhists, practically speaking, in India today. Very, very few. I mean, you'll find some, but very, very few compared to Nepal and Thailand and other countries that are surrounding India, and what to speak of Ceylon or Sri Lanka. So Shankaracharya appeared. He drove the Buddhists out, brought people back to the Vedic literatures. Then they were ready for higher understanding, utilizing the Vedic literatures, the direct meaning of the Vedic literatures. You had the great acharyas like Nimbarkacharya, Sripad Bhagavacharya, Ramanuja, Vishnu Swami, and ultimately Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu, who taught the most precise meaning of the Vedas in his Chincha Veda Tattva philosophy, one and different simultaneously, which we've gone over before. Okay, so that's a little history there. So text 92. Tanra sutrera hartakona jiva nahi jane ataivapane sutrarta kariyache vyakyane. The purport of the Vedanta Sutra is very difficult for an ordinary person to understand, but Vyasadeva, out of his causeless mercy, has personally explained the meaning. Ye Sutra Karta say Yadi Karaye Vyakyada Kavi Sutrera Mula Arta Lokera Hayagyana. If the Vedanta Sutra is explained by Vyasadeva himself, who has written it, in other words, he's the author, its original meaning can be understood by the people in general. Pranavera Yarta Gayatri te se hoya se arta chatush lokite vivarya kaya. The meaning of the sound vibration Omkara is present in the Gayatri mantra. The same is elaborately explained in the 4 shlokas of Srimad Bhagavatam known as the Chatu Shlokis. Chatu Shloki, that means the 4 shlokas. Brahmare Ishvara Chatu Shloki Ye Kahila Brahmanarde Se Upadesha Kaila. Whatever was spoken by the Supreme Personality of Godhead to Lord Brahma in these 4 verses of Srimad Bhagavatam was also explained to Narada by Lord Brahma. Narda se artha vyasere kahila shuni veda vyasamane vichara karila. Whatever Lord Brahma told Narada Muni was again explained by Narada Muni to Vyasadeva. Vyasadeva later considered these instructions in his mind. Eyartha amara shutrara vyakyanurupa bhagavata kariba sutrera Vashasarupa. Srila Vyasadeva considered that whatever he had received from Narada Muni as an explanation of Omkara, he would elaborately explain in his book Srimad Bhagavatam as a commentary on the Brahma Sutra. So Prabhupada explains that the sound vibration Omkara is the root of Vedic knowledge. Omkara is known as the Mahavokya, or supreme sounds. Pranava Sarvavedeshu Shabda Ke Purusham Narshu. That's from Bhagavad Gita. I am the sound vibration Om in the Vedic literature, as Krishna says in the Gita. Whatever meaning is in the supreme sound Omkar is further understood in the Gayatri Mantra. Again, the same meaning is explained in Srimad Bhagavatam in the 4 shlokas known as the Chatuk Shloki, which begin with the words Aham Evasam Evagre. The Lord says, only I existed before the creation. From this statement, the 4 shlokas have been composed, and these are known as the Chatuk Shloki, Bhagavatam 2.9, 33, 34, 35, and 36. In this way, the Supreme Personality of Godhead informed Lord Brahma about the purport of the Chatuk Shloki. Again, Lord Brahma explained this to Narada Muni, and Narada Muni explained it to Srila Vyasadeva. In this way, by the Parampara system or disciplic succession, the import of Vedic knowledge is explained, or gradually the original pranava is explained. That's Omkar is the pranava. In Srimad Bhagavatam, the conclusion is that the Brahma Sutra is explained in the Srimad Bhagavatam. It's the mature commentary of the Vedanta Sutra. Chari Veda Upashat Upanishade Yada Kichuhaya Tadharta Lana Vyasa Karila Sanchaya. Vyasadeva collected whatever Vedic conclusions were in the 4 Vedas and 108 Upanishads and placed them in the aphorisms of the Vedanta Sutra, as I mentioned. It's all in the aphorisms in code. Code doesn't mean like Morse code. It means in short statements so people know what to do. For example, the first verse of the Vedanta Sutra is Tato Brahmigayasha. Now is the time to look for the absolute truth. So, unless you have a guru, you won't know how to look. Where are you going to look? In the garden? Where are you going to look? On TV? No, you have to know where to look. In the Vedanta Sutra, the purport of all Vedic knowledge is explained, and Srimad Bhagavatam, the same purport has been explained in 18,000 verses. Vataiva Brahma Sutra Rabasya Shri Bhagavata Bhagavata Shloka Upanishad Kahi Eka Mata. Therefore, it is to be concluded that the Brahma Sutra is explained vividly in Srimad Bhagavatam. Also, what is explained in the verses of Srimad Bhagavatam has the same purport as what is explained in the Upanishads, because the Brahma Sutra explains the Upanishads, and Srimad Bhagavatam explains the Brahma Sutra, or Vedanta Sutra, which is the same thing. Atma vasyam idam vishwam yatkincha jagadam jagat tena jiktena bunjidam agradakashasvedanam. Everything animate or inanimate that is within the universe is controlled and owned by the Lord. One should therefore accept only those things for himself that are set aside. As is quoted, one should not accept other things, knowing well to whom they belong. That's actually, at least, other than the first line, it's from the Ishopanishad, which is also from the Srimad Bhagavatam. In the Srimad Bhagavatam is a different first line. This is a quotation from Srimad Bhagavatam 8.1.10. Communists and socialists are trying to propagate the philosophy that everything belongs to the mass of people of the state. Such an idea is not perfect. When this idea is expanded, we can see that everything belongs to God. That will be the perfection of a communistic idea. The purpose of Srimad Bhagavatam is here very nicely explained. Every one of us must be satisfied with those things the Supreme Personality of Godhead has allotted us. Don't be greedy, Prabhu. One should not encroach upon the possessions of others. This simple idea can be expanded in our daily lives. Everyone should have a piece of land given by the government, and everyone should possess a few cows, except for the sannyasis. Both of these should be utilized for one's daily bread. Above that, if something is manufactured in a factory, it should be considered the property of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Because the ingredients belong to the Supreme Lord, actually there's no need to manufacture such things artificially, but if it is done, one should consider that the goods produced belong to the Supreme Lord. Spiritual communism recognizes the supreme proprietorship of the Supreme Lord, as Lord Krishna explains in the Bhagavad Gita, the famous peace verse. Bhaktaram Jagatapasam Sarvalokamaheeshwaram Sutam Sarvabhutanam Gatvamam Shanti Richati 529. A person in full consciousness of me, knowing me to be the ultimate beneficiary of all sacrifices and austerities, the Supreme Lord of all planets and demigods, and the benefactor and well-wisher of all living entities, attains peace from the pangs of material nature. It is further explained in Srimad Bhagavatam that no one should claim anything as his property. Whatever property one claims to be his actually belongs to Krishna. One should be satisfied with whatever has been allotted by the Supreme Lord and should not encroach upon the property of others. This will lead to peace in the whole world. I wish that would happen. Bhagavatera sambandha videya prayojana chatuslokyate prakata tara kariyache lakshana. The essence of the Srimad Bhagavatam, our relationship with the Supreme Lord, our activities in that connection, and the goal of life is manifested in the 4 verses of Srimad Bhagavatam, known as the Chatu Shloki. Everything is explained in those verses. So what's being talked about here is Sambandha, relationship with the Supreme Lord, Abhideya, our activities in that connection, and Prayojana, the goal of human form of life. Those are the 3 aspects we've talked about many, many times. Sambandha, Abhideya, Prayojana. Sambandha means the relationship not only with the Supreme Lord, but the relationship between the Lord and his energies, the relationship between the jiva souls and each other, the relationships between the jiva souls and the material energy, and all those different permutations. And activities in that connection mean Bhakti Yoga. And the goal of life is Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namni Namaha. Ami Sambandha Tattva Amara Jnana Vijnana Amapaite Saranapati Abhideya Nama. This is what I just mentioned. Lord Krishna says, I am the center of all relationships. Knowledge of me and the practical application of that knowledge is actual knowledge. That's Bhakti Yoga. Approaching me for devotional service is called Abhideya. Of course, this Sambandha is the knowledge of Krishna, and the practical application of that knowledge is called Abhideya. 3 stages: Sambandha, Abhideya, Prayojana. Spiritual knowledge means fully understanding the absolute truth in 3 features: impersonal Brahman, localized Paramatma, and all-powerful Supreme Personality Godhead. Ultimately, when one takes shelter at the lotus feet of the Supreme Personality of Godhead and engages in the Lord's service, the resultant knowledge is called Vijnana, special knowledge or practical application of spiritual knowledge. In other words, to be more precise, realized knowledge. So realization, not only theoretical knowledge. Theoretical knowledge is called jnana, and realized knowledge is called vijnana. One should be engaged in the Lord's service to achieve the aim of life called prayojana, which means pure devotional service. That practice of devotional service to attain that goal of life is called abhideya. The same thing, 3 things I've just been mentioning. Sadhanera pala prema mula prayojana se preme paya jiva amara sevana. By rendering devotional service, one gradually rises to the platform of love of Godhead. That is the highest goal, that is the chief goal of life. On the platform of love of Godhead, one is eternally engaged in the service of the Lord. So here we find described Abhideya and Prayojana. Jnanam padamagulyam me yadvijnana samanvitam sarahashyam tadangam cha Garitam Madhya. Please hear attentively what I shall speak to you, for transcendental knowledge about me is not only scientific but full of mysteries. So this is the Bhagavatam part of the Bhagavad quotation from Bhagavatam 2:9-31, just surrounding the Chatu Shloki verses. For an explanation, see Adi Lila, chapter 1, text 51. Text 106. Etina tafahami kainu tomare jivatumi etina nadabe jani bhare. O Brahma, I shall explain all these truths to you, since you are a living being, Jiva. Without my explanation, you will not be able to understand your relationship with me, devotional activity, and life's ultimate goal. Relationship with me, Sambandha, devotional activity is Avideya, life's ultimate goal is Prayojana. Yache Amara Sarupa, Yache Amara Stiti, Yache Amara Guna, Karma Sadaishvarya Shakti. I shall explain to you my actual form and situation, my attributes and activities, and 6 opulences. Amara Kripiyahi Sabha Spuruka Tamare Etabale Tina Tattva Kahila Tanhare. Lord Krishna assured Lord Brahma, by my mercy all these things will be awakened in you. Saying this, the Lord began to explain the 3 truths, tattvas, to Lord Brahma, Sambandha, Abhideya, and Prayojana. Yavanaham yata bhavo yadrupa guna karmakaha tathaiva tattva vijnanam astu te madanugrahat. By my causeless mercy, be enlightened in truth about my personality, manifestations, qualities, and pastimes. This is a quotation from Srimad Bhagavatam 2.9.32. For an explanation, see Adi Lila, Chapter 1, Text 52. Shristira Purve Sadaishvarya Purnami Tahayye Prapancha Prakriti Purusha Amate Laye. Before the creation of the cosmic manifestation, the Lord said, I existed, and the total material energy, material nature, and the living entities all existed in me. That's the first of the Chatushloki verses. I mean, it's a summary of them. It's Hame Balsa Meva Great. It's different Sanskrit, but it means the same thing. Srishti Caritamrta Madhya Parveshya. Sorry. Papancheye Tekasava Sayami Haye. After creating the cosmic manifestation, I enter into it. Whatever you see in the cosmic manifestation is but an expansion of my energy. And then you're going to hear about the destruction. Pralaye avashishtahami purnahaye prakrita prapanchapaya amate laye. When the whole universe dissolves, I remain full in myself, and everything that was manifested is again preserved in me. So these are all different excerpts, not word by word excerpts, but explanatory excerpts from the first of the Chatushlokis. And here's the first of the Chatushlokis, just as we were talking about them. And I think we should, since it is 10 minutes before the hour, we should end right now and start with this first of the Chatushlokis tomorrow, which is very interesting. And so today we did up to text 112, 79 to 112. And so we're going to stop sharing, allow you all to ask your wonderful, educated, intelligent questions. So who would like to ask a question?
Hare Krishna, Gurudev.
Oh, bye, Caitanya. Good to see you. I don't see you, but good
Well,
to
hang on. Sorry, Gurudev. I'm just pulling over, just in the car. So, Hare Krishna, Gurudev. Dandavat Pranam, please accept my humble obeisances.
Haribol.
Haribol, Haribol, Gurudev. I don't know if it's an intelligent question, Gurudev. I'm not qualified to ask intelligent questions, but I do have a question. Can you hear me okay, Gurudev?
I can hear you fine, yeah.
Okay, that's great. The question was about Lord Buddha. So you know how I'm just trying to understand really, the purpose of his incarnation, because when you look at the Bhagavad Gita and it says the Lord comes for those purposes of either annihilating the miscreants or establishing the religious principles. And I'm trying to work out, or even associate with devotees and all of that, but I'm trying to work out what was the core purpose, therefore, of Lord Buddha, because even the religious principles he's established isn't quite, it's away from the Vedic literature and all of that. So,
Right.
What do you think? Sorry, Gurudev, if you can enlighten me there.
Well, Prabhupada explained that. Prabhupada explained that Buddha's primary teaching was called ahimsa. Ahimsa means, and actually Prabhupada gave the full quote, ahimsa paramo dharma, that nonviolence is the topmost dharma. And that was included in the understanding of Buddha's eightfold path, right living, right thinking, and everything like that. And Krishna, sometimes when he comes down, he can't just teach everything because people just ain't capable of understanding things. In many cases, they would actually kill. Of course, they can't kill Krishna, but in many cases, they would kill a prophet. And we see this throughout history. The great saints and prophets have been attacked and killed when they tried to preach too directly. I mean, like you see with Jesus Christ, it was something like that. So, Buddha, his mission was to get people to stop killing at least, to become a little pious. It's a step in the right direction. I mean, maybe it's a little off of the right direction, but it's a step in the right direction because the Bhagavatam says that Nivrittatarshar Upagiyamana Bhavoshara Shotra Mano Bilamat Ka Uttama Shloka Gurnahanavadat Puman Vidajeta Binal Pashu that no one can understand Krishna consciousness if they're killing animals. So killing animals was rampant at that particular time in the name of religion. In the name of religion. And you'll find that religion in many cases degrades to that particular point. For example, one of the places I go to is Fiji. You may have heard of Fiji before, somehow or other. So one of the places I go to Fiji, and what has happened is the name of religion at the Ram Mandirs, everybody's taking what? Kava.
Yep.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
it's become so degraded that it's become the Ramayan recital has become an opportunity for engaging in intoxication. So that's what happens. It degrades. So you got to first point is get them to stop taking intoxication. I mean, I wouldn't go into the Ram Mandir and say, you're reading the wrong Ramayan. You should be reading the Valmiki instead of the Tulsidas Ramayan. I would go in and say, stop taking kava. First step, one step. And, keep doing whatever you're doing, but stop taking kava and become vegetarians. So this is what Lord Buddha was doing. Of course, they weren't taking kava, but they were killing all sorts of animals, not only chickens. They didn't kill cows, obviously. In India, up until the present time, uh, very few people killed cows, except for the Muslims. But they were killing other animals, I guess pigs, chicken, goats. Goat eating was very popular in India and also in Fiji and many other places. So Lord Buddha's intention was to stop that, at least get people peaceful, not only to stop the Brahmins from exploiting everybody, but to bring India to back to a more peaceful situation in the mode of goodness, so that later on they could come back to the Vedas. So it was a step-by-step process. Sometimes you can't tell people everything, and Buddha wasn't supposed to tell people everything. He was supposed to take people as far as they could go in understanding at least the periphery or peripheral
Equally
knowledge.
done, man.
Makes
Okay?
perfect sense, Gurudev. Thank you so much for that.
Okay,
Haribol.
thank you. All right, thank you for your question. Who else has a question? I see. Okay, there's a. All right. Radha Padma has a question. Please accept my obeisance. Srila Vyasadeva elaborated the 4 verses into the whole of the Vedic scripture, and then Srimad Bhagavatam is like purports given by Srila Vyasa, and some stories in Bhagavatam are metaphors and not fact, as you mentioned about Puranjana. So most stories are
Not
actually.
very good. It's not the right thing.
Mo- most stories are actual fact, but the Puranjana story is not. It's actually a metaphorical story. So so Srila Vyasadeva was expanding upon the four verses of the original four verses of the Srimad Bhagavatam. Those are the four verses spoken by Lord Vishnu, the Garbhodakshaya Vishnu, to Lord Brahma, the first living entity in this universe. Ahameva sameva gre nanya yatsara saparam paschadaham yaditacha yo vishasheta shoshmiham. That's the first verse, in which we're going to start on tomorrow. The first verse of the Chatu Shloki. It means the four nutshell verses. So those four nutshell verses form the basis of the Srimad Bhagavatam and the whole Srimad Bhagavatam, or expansions, and stories told about that. And then in other universes, Prabhupada explained that sometimes the Srimad Bhagavatam has hundreds or thousands of cantos. We just have 12 cantos in the Srimad Bhagavatam. But the meaning is exactly the same. Those four nutshell verses contain the very essence of the Srimad Bhagavatam, and whatever stories are there, whatever stories of kings, whatever stories of creation are there, whatever stories about Krishna's pastimes, they're all under the heading or the categories of the four verses of the Srimad Bhagavatam, the four original verses of Srimad Bhagavatam. All right, and here is recommendation of dhams to visit. I recommend Vrindavan. I recommend Mayapur. I recommend Jagannath Puri. I recommend Kurukshetra. I recommend so many places. Tirupati, Tirumala. Okay. So who else has a question? So who else has a question they would like to hear? And also your neighborhood temple, we recommend highly. Neighborhood temple, whether you're in Sydney, whether you're in Brisbane, whether you're in India, there's usually a Hare Krishna temple nearby.
Hare Krishna,
Oh,
Gurudev.
Haribal, you have a question? Nalini Kant.
Please accept my respectful obeisances, Gurudev. Gurudev, about Sankaracharya. So at the time of Sankaracharya, as per time, place, and circumstances, he gave impersonalism. So in today's world, also there is a lot of atheism and impersonalism. But by the mercy of Srila Prabhupada, everyone gets direct knowledge of bhakti. So uh, mm, so that time was more degraded than present time.
That time was more degraded than present time? No, I would think it was, I mean, less degraded in terms of animal killing and all those other things. People were far more educated. Uh, but Shankaracharya was given that mission in order to prepare the ground for Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, bringing people back to the Vedic literatures. So sometimes the devotee has that mission to prepare the ground, or just arrange for someone else to appear who would carry the mission further. Uh, for example, there's stories in the Navadvip Dham Mahatmya about how different acharyas, they actually saw Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and Lord Chaitanya was revealed to them, but they were told not to reveal that. They would to let Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu reveal himself. So these are, and also they're pastimes, but they're strategic pastimes of the Supreme Lord and his devotees.
Thank you,
Okay, I
Gurudev.
mean, India was definitely less degraded than the Western world up until a few years ago. Now India is like copying the Western world. Like you see, if you go to Delhi, in many cases, the degradation is greater than you'll find in modern cities in America or in Australia or New Zealand. Uh, just like one of my disciples, one time he was looking for a wife. He found a nice wife, but he was looking for a wife, and I said, "Why don't you marry someone in India?" He said, "In Delhi," because he's from Delhi. He said, "No, everyone is so degraded." So I was thinking, the Indian culture has been lost to a great extent. In the villages, you'll still see a little bit of nice culture there. Okay, I think it's time to end, and hopefully we'll see everybody soon. Well, tomorrow on the internet, same time, same station. But for those of you in Australia, we'll see you soon. For those of you in New Zealand, you can only pray that somehow or other New Zealand will open up by July. It's supposed to open up by July
Probably very soon.
for foreigners. For foreigners other than Australians. Anyway, so I plan on going there in July, and I plan to go to Australia next month, beginning of April, sorry. Beginning of April. So, all glorious, there's divine grace, Srila